Observe the velocity of India's current expansion. This modernization is driven by a state roadmap projecting a tenfold increase in GDP over 20 years. But this economic expansion is running parallel to a sharp decline in democratic metrics. As the state builds its high-tech future, its institutional transparency is actively degrading. This is the macroeconomic goal of Viksit Bharat 2047. The blue line tracks the jump from a current $4 trillion economy to a $30 trillion global leader by the centenary of independence. Now, consider the data from Reporters Without Borders. Their World Press Freedom Index shows India dropping to 157th out of 180 countries, a record of institutional decline that intersects sharply with the rising GDP projection. Reaching that $30 trillion target requires India to maintain an 8% annual real GDP growth rate consistently for the next 2 decades. The central question is what that $30 trillion looks like in practice. Will the endpoint be the broad prosperity promised in the blueprint, or a wealth pool centralized within a high-tech oligarchy? The optimism of the state is grounded in policy papers like this one from the International Journal for Multidisciplinary Research, which models a path towards inclusive and sustainable growth. The architecture of this plan requires the coordination of 2 specific pillars: the financial economy and industrial development. According to the blueprint, these pillars will function as engines for universal financial inclusion, creating millions of jobs to bridge the divide between rural and urban populations. This model operates on the mathematical assumption that rapid economic growth will inherently distribute wealth across the population. The first pillar requires a significant deepening of India's financial ecosystem to mobilize long-term investment. The primary tool for this expansion is Digital Public Infrastructure, or DPI. This visualization shows the reach of the Unified Payments Interface, or UPI. It covers 99% of India's PIN codes and accounts for 84% of all retail digital payments. This network links with the JAM Trinity, Jan Dhan bank accounts, Aadhaar digital identity, and mobile numbers, to pull the unbanked population into the formal economy. This creates digital paper trails for micro, small, and medium enterprises, allowing them to access formal credit and join larger supply chains. The financial pillar is designed to formalize, track, and centralize capital at a national scale. The second pillar focuses on the infrastructure and industrial capacity needed to absorb that capital. Today, India's workforce remains structurally lopsided. Nearly 46% of workers are still engaged in low-productivity agriculture. The state's response includes flagship programs like the PM Gati Shakti Master Plan and production-linked incentives to boost domestic manufacturing. These initiatives aim to move millions of workers into high-tech manufacturing, intending to raise that sector's GDP contribution to 25% by 2047. Executing logistics and energy corridors on this scale requires massive, concentrated capital. The logistics of these projects favor the few large industrial conglomerates capable of handling multi-billion-dollar state contracts. This brings us to a requirement hidden within the economic roadmap itself. The Viksit Bharat model doesn't just depend on roads and digital payments. Look at Table 1 of the strategic enablers. The bottom row specifies institutional capacity for governance and regulation. The model relies on these institutions to ensure industrial growth remains inclusive and competitive. The math of the $30 trillion goal assumes robust, transparent institutions that prevent monopolistic capture. If those institutions are weakened, the model for equitable prosperity has a fatal flaw. To test that institutional health, we can look at the 2026 findings from Reporters Without Borders. RSF reports that India's media has entered an unofficial state of emergency under Prime Minister Narendra Modi, whose administration has seen a significant rapprochement between the ruling party and the families that dominate the media. This has led to the rise of what journalists call Godi media, where pluralism is dismantled through concentrated corporate ownership. The scale of this consolidation is significant. Mukesh Ambani, a close ally of the Prime Minister, now owns more than 70 media outlets. In 2022, Gautam Adani, another tycoon close to the administration, acquired NDTV. RSF noted that this acquisition signaled the end of pluralism in India's mainstream media. The state uses billions in public advertising funds to pressure dissenting outlets, while using colonial-era sedition and anti-terrorism laws to target individual reporters. This pressure is acute for journalists covering sensitive regions like Kashmir, where reporters frequently face police harassment and arbitrary detention. These actions are dismantling the institutional capacity required by the Viksit Bharat model. The very transparency needed to ensure growth benefits the population is being actively suppressed. The financial engines of this growth model provide the precise leverage required for institutional capture. It creates a cycle. The state directs massive infrastructure contracts to a few conglomerates, who acquire independent media. Those outlets produce a pro-state narrative that secures political support. This loop locks out smaller businesses and the rural population from economic power and accountability. The concentration of wealth needed for rapid industrial growth is being used as a weapon to silence democratic oversight. Even with these democratic failures, the raw trajectory toward a $30 trillion economy is technically possible. The official 2047 vision predicts a broad-based, inclusive, developed nation, but the data indicates a different destination. Digital infrastructure and formalization will create immense wealth, but without transparent institutions, that wealth will pool at the absolute top of the corporate structure. Without a reversal in the degradation of press freedom and institutional pluralism, the India of 2047 is on track to become an incredibly wealthy, high-tech oligarchy.